Did Israel and the United States obliterate Iran's nuclear program? Donald Trump says they did. Other analysts say Iran's facilities are seriously damaged, but that the story of the Iranian nuclear program is far from over. It's premature and counterproductive, they say, to claim total victory. What's the actual truth? We'll try to separate the signal from the noise next.
This is Washington Week with The Atlantic. Corporate funding provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again, from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic and moderator, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. So let's start with a little etymology. Obliterate comes from the Latin obliterare, which originally meant to blot out or erase letters or words. Today, the main use of the word obliterate is to describe what did or did not happen to the Fordo underground uranium enrichment plant 125 miles south of Tehran when it was bombed by the United States Air Force. For reasons we will discuss tonight, President Trump believes it very important to claim that the operation against Iran's nuclear program was an unalloyed, absolute, complete victory requiring no follow-through. The truth is, it's actually much too early to come to definitive conclusions about the damage done. Joining me tonight to discuss Trump, Netanyahu, Khamenei, and the true state of affairs in the Middle East post-attack are Shane Harris, who covers intelligence and national security for The Atlantic. David Ignatius is a columnist at The Washington Post. Andrea Mitchell is the chief Washington and foreign affairs correspondent for NBC News. And Ashley Parker covers the White House for The Atlantic. Thank you all very much for being with us tonight. David, I want to turn to you first to give an overall assessment, but let's listen to Donald Trump talk about the attack Saturday.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime. The strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
So, benefit of the doubt here for a minute. For 25 years, the United States, Israel, Sunni Arab states, Europe, have been warning that it's untenable to allow the Iranian regime to have nuclear weapons. They've been looking for ways to stop the program once and for all. A lot of people are secretly happy, and some openly happy, that Donald Trump did what he did. Is there a chance, or a good chance, that Donald Trump actually did the thing that for 25 years the West has wanted to see happen?
Well, he attempted it, which is something in itself. He actually went ahead and took the strike. You have to say, whatever the final bomb damage assessment, it was an extraordinary use of military power halfway around the world, something that no other country could do or really even could think of doing. So I think that's a first thing to say, and it does send a message to the world about American power that will persist well beyond this strike. The reason that it matters exactly what the bomb damage was is that will condition what now follows. If it was obliterated for years to come, that makes it easy for Trump because the Iranian nuclear program really is gone. You don't have to worry about follow-on negotiations. You don't have to worry about removal of equipment. You don't have to worry about a whole series of issues. You don't have to think about how you enforce an agreement because you don't need an agreement. It's obliterated. But if it's short of that, and the evidence is it is something short of totally obliterated, then a series of questions arise about how you'll make sure that Iran never gets that nuclear weapon, an Iran that will have much more desire to have one now after this war than it did before. So that's why these questions matter, and we're just at the beginning of this. For Trump to treat this as a matter of semantics, and I must say, for some in the media to do the same, really misses the point. This is about the future, how much destruction of the program happened.
Shane, maybe you can just walk through this for a minute. Give us the granular look at the state of the Iranian nuclear program now, based on the initial battle damage assessment.
Yeah, so it's important to keep two things in mind when talking about this. There's the highly enriched uranium, which is the core ingredient that you need to create the weapon. There's some question about whether those stockpiles have now been removed and secreted somewhere. And then there are the centrifuges, which you need to enrich that uranium to its state where it can be a bomb. So the places where Iran was enriching that, we know, are heavily damaged. Forget, obliterate, totally obliterate. It's not binary. Significant damage done to them. Fordo was the one that buried underneath the mountain, maybe a little bit harder to tell. Natanz is the other major facility. The Israelis had been hitting that as well. That's got more visible damage around it. And the IAEA, the international inspectors, attest to that. That appears that these two facilities have been significantly damaged. There's a third facility at Isfahan that is also very important to the construction of the uranium. That appears to be significantly damaged. This is not to say that Iran cannot make a bomb, but these three places that are central to that have sustained some serious damage. The question now is, can Iran take that 408 kilograms, about nearly half a ton of highly enriched uranium, and get that into centrifuges? Are those centrifuges up and running somewhere? Are they stored somewhere where they could be put into use? These are kind of the really next key tactical questions. And the Israelis and the United States will be watching that very closely to see if there's activity related to that. But these key components in these facilities that the U.S. and the Israelis have been striking have obviously been damaged and will create an impediment for some time. How long it would take Israel to rebuild this is the thing that people are debating right now.
Andrea, what's your assessment?
That according to European intelligence, according to the IAEA and others, that some of it was moved to other locations, and not necessarily to Isfahan and Natanz, but to other undisclosed locations, which is one of the big issues. What Iran has never explained is why it needed to enrich to 60%, that is just below weapons grade. It then has to go through several steps, and that's why the breakout time was for a nuclear capability, but not a weapon, because they still have to turn this enriched uranium into small metallic pellets, if you will. It then has to be weaponized and miniaturized into a warhead, unless it's going to be some sort of a dirty bomb. So there were still other steps, but it was not anything that they would have needed for a civilian program, which is what they claimed they needed.
Right.
And so they were vulnerable. And the issue now is Israel going to go back in on whatever pretext if they feel that this has not been completely destroyed?
Well, the other question is, would Donald Trump go back in and feel, there is Trump rhetoric, and then there's intelligence reality. If the United States intelligence community, if the Israelis say, you know what, we didn't completely destroy Fordo, is this a one and done for Donald Trump? Or do you think a month from now, 3 months, 6 months, he would actually go around and do this again?
Well, I think it is unpredictable because, in fact, on June 13th, it was not at all predicted that he would go in when the Israelis first did. There was considerable pressure from the Saudis and others in the Gulf not to do this on him and to try to come up with some other result. And in fact, my own interpretation, and I defer to Ashley, who has covered him far longer and more intensively, is he saw the success of the Israeli operation, which was remarkable. The air defenses were gone. They went in. They developed air superiority. Soon it became
and they assassinated most of the military leadership within the same
military
hour
and
frame.
political leadership.
Yes. And
so
scientists.
their targeted assassinations have been with Nasrallah, with Hamas, with all the proxies, and now with Tehran itself, central Tehran.
Wait, are you suggesting?
Remarkable.
Are you suggesting, and Ashley obviously can give us more insight on this, are you suggesting that Donald Trump bombed Iran because Israel was successful and he wanted a part of That excitement?
I think that you can infer that that is part of it. And they had this plan that was on the shelf that had been rehearsed. We knew it was rehearsed in August of 23. And this had been worked on for 15 years, as General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said, which was the only, military briefing that was not purely political, in contrast to the defense secretary's briefing.
Right. Ashley.
So there's a lot of elements at play, obviously, right? Of course, one is he's watching the success of Israel. That's an aspect of it. Another, and this did not come up in meaningful ways in Situation Room discussions, but is that Iran had attempted, it was very clear Iran wanted to assassinate President Trump, and that really affected the Trump campaign. They had to change what they did. At one point, they sent Trump on a decoy plane, and they left sort of presumably more expendable and certainly more alarmed staff on Trump Force One when there was this threat of Iranian assassination. So it has been described as very top of mind, but not actually a part of the decision-making process. And as Andrea said, it is, of course, unpredictable. That is sort of inherently evergreen for Donald Trump. But I do think the one-and-done doctrine, to the extent that Trump has a doctrine, is illustrative, because you can go back and for the strike on Syria in his first term, for going after Soleimani, the strike on him, for a brief strike on ISIS, and talking to Trump officials, they said people misunderstand him as isolationist or anti-interventionist. What he prefers are these sort of short bursts of kinetic energy. So people were confused at first why he would get involved, but he doesn't see this as being drawn in to a forever war in the Middle East. He sees this as a one and done, or maybe one and done and then another one.
After a suitable period where people have forgotten the previous promises.
Yes, he dips in, he dips out.
David, what are the chances that, and I want to get into this strange bipolar relationship he has with the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, yelling at each other one day, loving each other the next.
Dropping not just, the bunker buster, but the F-bomb.
Dropping the dropping the most powerful weapon in the Trump arsenal. I want to get into that in a minute, but I'm curious. It seems unlikely that Donald Trump is going to go revisit the scene soon in a kinetic way. That he's not going to go to Fort Out next week and say, "Well, I got to clean this up, so I got to drop another few bombs." Do you think he'll let Israel do it if Israel decides in a month or two that there's still things that need to be destroyed?
The Israeli defense minister has already announced that Israel will have a policy of enforcement, meaning if Iran tries to rebuild, Israel announces that it will come back in and knock it down again. I think the opportunity for Trump is to build a relationship with an Iran that really has agreed to a new nuclear deal. And that's a win on a level beyond the bombing of Fordo. That's a real change in modern history in the Middle East.
That sounds great, but this is not a guy who likes really intense multi-month negotiations on highly technical issues.
Absolutely, and he has such a tiny team that they're so obviously overstretched. If he's going to do this, he needs a group, a task force that will follow through. I heard it suggested that maybe Jared Kushner, who knows the Middle East, would be the person to lead this group. That's hard to imagine in some ways. But if he's going to remain serious about this biggest commitment of military power he's ever made, he's going to need more people to do the follow-through.
The only reason that it's not far-fetched that Jared Kushner will soon be parachuting into Tehran to negotiate a nuclear deal is that nothing is far-fetched anymore. But go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, I just think that Jared Kushner is deeply invested, literally, in some very big projects, including in Belgrade and elsewhere around the world, and that there's a lot at stake. That is perhaps even bigger to him than this. But the other piece of it is the Abraham Accords, and that is what they're now talking about. But I think there is a naivete about that they would like to complete what they started it was a really important legacy of the first Trump term, is beginning to have recognition of Israel by Arab states. But they need to get the Saudis.
Right. In fact, the proximate cause of the Hamas invasion that set everything off
Exactly.
was Hamas's desire to stop Saudi Arabia from recognizing Israel.
Precisely. And so now they think, well, is there a way to, resurrect that? And my reporting from a lot of Arab sources is that there is not unless they deal with Gaza.
Right.
They have to deal with Gaza. Gaza is being starved. This food delivery system has been discredited everywhere, despite the State Department now pouring $30 million into it as of this week. And it is more than 400 children have died by any account in just trying to get food, plus adults.
So in other words, the road to the Abraham Accords runs not through Tehran, but it runs through
the
Gaza.
Saudis are insisting that something be done, and even something about some kind of Palestinian state, and that is something where Donald Trump has, failed to persuade Netanyahu.
I want to talk a little bit about the way in which this administration deals with crises and talks about crises. Let's watch Pete Hegseth get into an argument with one of the best Pentagon reporters we have in the press corps, Jen Griffin from Fox, over what I interpret as a straightforward question.
Do you have certainty that all the highly enriched uranium was inside the Fordo Mountain, or some of it, because there were satellite photos that showed more than a dozen trucks there 2 days in advance? Are you certain none of that highly enriched uranium was moved?
Of course, we're watching every single aspect, but Jennifer, you've been about the worst, the one who misrepresents the most intentionally. What the president says. I'm familiar.
I reported out the ventilation shafts on Saturday night, and in fact, I was the first to describe the B-2 bombers, the refueling, the entire mission with great accuracy. So I take issue with that.
Ashley, why are they like this? Why can't he just answer the question, open question, normal question, where's the highly enriched uranium?
Well, first I was struck by, it goes back to the way Trump is insisting on this be described, which is your original question of how are they talking about crises? And with Trump, everything is always superlative, right? It couldn't just be, we set Iran's nuclear program back significantly, and we're still waiting to understand the nuances, as David articulated. It's that it was totally obliterated. So he sets a superlative line where anything short of that is disloyalty, right? So the facts are now immaterial to sort of the semantic debate. And then for Pete Hegseth, which again, it's just worth stating that is a wild response to a very basic question. He is performing to save his job. He's had a lot of missteps. In many ways, he's been cosplaying the role of defense secretary. Trump likes him. He likes him from Fox News. He likes that he's tough. But that is something where Hegseth, like a lot of people in this administration, are so clearly performing for an audience.
He doesn't seem that tough. I mean, it wasn't even a tough question from a great reporter, but it was a straightforward question, and he seemed to lose his cool.
It was thoroughly unprofessional. The job of defense secretary is, in a lot of ways, the most important management job, short of the president, in the world. And he behaved, like a defensive, skittish, angry, impulsive person. It's so striking to contrast him as defense secretary with the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, who throughout this has behaved responsibly, like a real military leader, whose response to this was not to talk about himself or be defensive, but to talk about the soldiers and airmen who'd done the attack, the people who'd spent 15 years, as you said earlier, getting ready, designing the weapon, designing the concept, the people at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar who were responsible for shooting down the missiles. You want to talk about, all the troops. It was such a contrast, and at a time when the military has this really erratic leadership in Hegseth, it was good to see that the top military leader in uniform is a responsible person.
And
Go ahead.
Jennifer Griffin is superb as a reporter. And it was so offensive. But it's also that the president should not be coming out within an hour or so of this strike and saying we obliterated. There was no bomb damage assessment.
Right.
He should probably say we will wait for an assessment, but the early reports are very positive. Something that would be more professional. Getting back to your first word of obliterate.
Obliterare.
Oh, excuse me. My high school Latin fails me. But,
Our next episode will be totally in Latin. But go on.
but it's just, using that word is a political word. And
Yeah.
what General Kane, as David was just saying, he was being very precise and professional.
You know what struck me as interesting about these superlatives and this exaggeration? I'll read you a recent tweet from Ayatollah Khamenei. This is after he's come out of whatever bunker he was in. My congratulations on our dear Iran's victory over the U.S. regime. The U.S. regime entered the war directly because it felt that if it didn't, the Zionist regime would be completely destroyed. It entered the war in an effort to save that regime, but achieved nothing. Like, that's nonsense talk, but it's nonsense talk from an authoritarian fundamentalist regime. I'm just continually surprised that there's not more sophistication in the communication about real life events from this administration, from senior-most people in this administration. And Shane, I wanted to ask you, you've just written with Isaac Stanley Becker an interesting story about Tulsi Gabbard's trajectory, another person like Pete Hegseth who has this big question mark on her. Where are we going to see a lot of shakeups in the national security complex soon?
I think it's possible, and it may be starting with Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, remember, she comes in to the administration kind of in this MAGA wing of no war, no foreign intervention. There's a number of missteps she has with the president. He does not rely on her as a key intelligence advisor. I think it's also safe to say he doesn't rely on many people as intelligence advisors. But in this one in particular, that relationship is not very solid. And she gave this testimony back in March in which she just plainly said what the intelligence assessments have been for years, which is Iran is not trying to build a nuclear weapon. When the president made the decision that we're going to attack Iran, she had to scramble to quickly say, but what I meant was, and there are these caveats in the intelligence. She's trying very quickly to get the intelligence and her statements about it to line up with the president's political preferences. That is dangerous in the conduct of intelligence. That is what intelligence professionals try to avoid.
That's the antithesis.
It is politicization of intelligence, which is precisely what she said she was going to root out in the intelligence community because she claimed it was endemic in the Biden administration.
David, what is the danger, and maybe Andrea too, what is the danger of this politicization of intelligence?
So presidents always want intelligence that will support their policies. And intelligence analysts are always under pressure to tailor their reporting to support political goals. We saw this through the Vietnam War. LBJ was furious that the CIA didn't say this was going great, that the body count was not a useful metric. We saw it in Iraq, where CIA analysts kept saying, this isn't going to work. We saw it in Afghanistan. And so this is a recurring problem. In the case of this administration, they have already gotten an intelligence assessment saying your claim that the Trendiaragua gang is being directed by Venezuela has no evidence to support it, and demanded another estimate. We didn't like your first estimate, give us another one. And Gabbard led that effort. So, this is a time when good intelligence about what's happening is crucial, and they are trying to spin it.
By the way, Andrea, there's an interesting lesson here. You look at Iran's response. It's been a great victory over the United States, the Ayatollah says, from the rubble. This is what happens when governments lie to themselves.
Exactly. And we saw this in Helsinki most notably when the president in his first term agreed with Vladimir Putin on the subject of interference in the election over his own intelligence agencies. And at the time, one of Tulsi Gabbard's predecessors, Dan Coates, put out an immediate statement defending the intelligence community and was eventually fired. When you politicize intelligence, as David was just suggesting, it is so self-defeating. It brings me back to Curveball, who was the primary source for the Iraq War, for there being, weapons of mass destruction, biological weapons, in 2003. And that is what trapped the CIA at the time. And unfortunately, the Secretary of State, in his testimony to the United Nations in front of the world, we were all there in February of 2003, and Secretary Powell regretted that to the day he died, because he was misled. When you have intelligence that is politicized and pressured, as it was by Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, and trying to satisfy the White House, that's what you get. You get into mistaken wars.
So, in short, it would be smart for any administration to look at recent history and say, I'm going to tell the truth to myself about what we've achieved.
Exactly.
Anyway. It's a great conversation. We're going to have to leave it there for now. I want to thank our guests for joining me, and thank you at home for watching us. For more on Tulsi Gabbard and her controversial tenure as the Director of National Intelligence, please read Shane Harris and Isaac Stanley Becker's latest article at theatlantic.com. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week with The Atlantic is provided by Consumer Cellular. Additional funding is provided by Ku and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.